On August 30th, 1997, a vice president at Gaylord Entertainment named Alan Hall was asked by the Nashville Banner whether the company intended to demolish its theme park, a place called Opryland USA, which sat on 120 acres along the Cumberland River and drew 2.5 million visitors a year. His answer was unequivocal. "That's a ridiculous idea," Hall said. "We're not going to level the park." 66 days later, Opryland was dead. The rides were being unbolted. The stages were dark. A quarter century of Nashville's most important tourist attraction was about to be scraped off the earth and replaced by a shopping mall. A decision made without a strategic analysis, without a business plan, and without asking the city that loved it. The company that did this would later admit, through its own spokesman, that its current management team had found no compelling reasons why the decision to close the park was taken in the first place. That's where this story ends. But it doesn't begin there. It begins with an insurance company. In 1901, a man named C.A. Craig bought an insolvent insurance outfit in Nashville called the National Sick and Accident Association. By 1902, it had been reorganized and renamed the National Life and Accident Insurance Company. Its motto was, "We shield millions." And for its first 2 decades, that's mostly what it did: sell life insurance to working people across the South. But National Life's leadership had an instinct that went beyond actuarial tables. They understood something that most insurance companies didn't: the value of being heard. On October 5th, 1925, National Life launched a radio station from its downtown Nashville office building at 7th Avenue and Union Street. The call letters were WSM, taken directly from the company motto, "We shield millions." The station broadcast on 1,000 watts. Within 2 years, it was broadcasting at 5,000. By 1932, WSM was one of the most powerful clear channel stations in America, blanketing the continent at 50,000 watts on 650 AM. And 7 weeks after its first broadcast, WSM started something that would define Nashville for the next century. On November 28, 1925, an 80-year-old fiddle player named Uncle Jimmy Thompson sat down in front of a WSM microphone and played for an hour. The program was called the WSM Barn Dance. Within a couple of years, it had a new name, the Grand Ole Opry. It became the longest-running radio broadcast in American history. It also became the most effective insurance marketing tool ever devised, because National Life agents could hand out free tickets to the Opry as a way to get in the door with potential customers. The show that was supposed to sell policies ended up selling Nashville itself. The Opry moved from studio to studio, venue to venue, as its audiences grew. It landed at the Ryman Auditorium in 1943, a former tabernacle church that seated about 3,000 people, and stayed there for 31 years. But by the mid-1960s, the Ryman was showing its age. There was no air conditioning. There was one dressing room for men and a converted restroom for women. The surrounding neighborhood was declining. Performers waited to go on stage in the hallway and the alley behind the south wall, where, as Willie Nelson once observed, Tootsie's Orchid Lounge was only 17 steps away. The show's popularity was actually growing. Weekly crowds were outstripping the building's capacity, but the building itself was falling apart. Meanwhile, National Life had merged with Third National Bank in 1968 to form a holding company called NLT Corporation. And NLT's leadership decided it was time to move the Opry out of downtown Nashville entirely. They would build a new air-conditioned auditorium with a larger capacity and ample parking in an undeveloped area east of the city, giving visitors a more modern experience than the creaking Ryman could offer. The man who conceived the larger vision for what that move could become was Irving Waugh, the president of WSM. In 1969, Waugh traveled to Houston and visited the Astro Domain complex that surrounded the Astrodome. He saw a ride-oriented park with hotels, entertainment, and the stadium as its centerpiece. And something clicked. In Houston, the Astrodome was the centerpiece to that theme park, Waugh later explained. In Anaheim, the Castle was the centerpiece to Disneyland. And in Nashville, the Opry House was going to be our centerpiece. But Waugh didn't want just another amusement park full of roller coasters. He wanted the park organized around different types of American music. Jazz in one section, bluegrass in another, gospel in a third, with live performances as the main attraction. He wanted rides, yes, but fewer than most parks. What he wanted was a show park. In September 1969, Waugh formally announced plans for Opryland USA. NLT chose a 400-acre site in eastern Davidson County along the Cumberland River, adjacent to a 4-lane divided highway then under construction that would later be named Briley Parkway. The project would include a theme park, a new Grand Ole Opry House, and a small hotel called the Oprytown Inn. The total cost of the theme park alone would be $28 million. On May 27, 1972, Opryland USA opened its gates. Admission was $5.25 for adults, $3.50 for children. It had opened just 8 months after Walt Disney World, and the timing seemed audacious. What could a music park in Nashville offer against the Magic Kingdom? But the answer turned out to be something completely different, and something nearly 1.5 million people wanted to see in the park's very first year. That first-year attendance exceeded even the most optimistic projections. What made Opryland unlike any other park in the country was exactly what Waugh had intended. This wasn't a place where the rides were the point and the entertainment was filler. Opryland was, at its heart, an outdoor concert hall that happened to have a log flume. Multiple stages ran shows throughout the day, and the performers were real musicians, young, talented, often fresh off the bus to Nashville and using the park as a proving ground. The park was divided into themed musical areas. You'd walk through a section celebrating New Orleans jazz, then into an Appalachian bluegrass village, then past a rockabilly strip. The music wasn't piped in through speakers. It was live, and it was constant. The first big rides were modest. The Timber Topper roller coaster, the Flume Zoom log ride. But the park wasn't trying to compete with Six Flags on thrill count. It was selling an experience, a full day inside the living history of American music, punctuated by the occasional stomach drop. A railroad looped the park's perimeter on beautifully restored antique locomotives. 2 formerly coal-burning engines converted to fuel oil. So beloved, they had names, Beatrice and Rachel. And if you were lucky on any given afternoon, you'd find Roy Acuff, the king of country music, a Grand Ole Opry member since 1938, sitting on a park bench near the Opry Plaza, signing autographs for anyone who stopped. Acuff didn't need to be there. He was in his 80s. He just liked it. The Grand Ole Opry House opened on the Opryland grounds on March 16, 1974, and the night was so significant that the sitting President of the United States showed up. Richard Nixon, 2 weeks after his closest aides had been indicted by the Watergate grand jury, walked onto the Opry stage and played piano. He performed My Wild Irish Rose and Happy Birthday for First Lady Pat Nixon, and led the audience in God Bless America. Roy Acuff, the beloved patriarch of the Opry, tried to teach Nixon how to use a yo-yo. Nixon joked, "I'll stay here and try to learn how to use the yo-yo. You go up and be president, Roy." The new auditorium had 4,400 seats, full air conditioning, and proper backstage facilities. And here's a detail worth remembering. When they built the new Opry stage, they cut a 6-foot circle of wood from the old Ryman stage and set it into the center of the new one. Every performer who has played the Opry since 1974 has stood inside that circle. It was a gesture of continuity, a declaration that even when you move forward, you carry what matters with you. That circle is still there. By 1975, Opryland added a state fair area with new rides, including the Wabash Cannonball, a wooden roller coaster that would become the park's most iconic attraction. But before that area could open, the Cumberland River flooded most of the park. The opening was delayed, and some animals in the petting zoo were lost. Opryland sat in a flood zone. Everyone knew this. It would matter later. Even with the flood, the park's trajectory through the mid-1970s was extraordinary. By 1977, Opryland was Nashville's top tourist attraction, pulling nearly 2 million visitors a year. Most came from surrounding states, Tennessee, Kentucky, Georgia, Alabama, often combining the park visit with a night at the Grand Ole Opry. The nearest comparable theme parks were hours away, which gave Opryland a geographic monopoly it would hold for decades. And the park's success prompted a decision that would reshape Nashville's entire hospitality industry. In November 1977, the Opryland Hotel opened next door to the park, with 580 guest rooms and a lobby designed to resemble a grand southern mansion, complete with a sweeping staircase and a Tiffany-style chandelier. That hotel would grow into one of the most remarkable buildings in the American South. Between 1983 and 1984, it added over 400 rooms and a garden conservatory, a glass-enclosed Victorian garden that maintained a constant temperature of 71 degrees and housed more than 10,000 tropical plants. In 1988, the Cascades Atrium opened, 2 acres under glass, nearly 800 new guest rooms, and a 3.5-story waterfall surrounded by 8,000 tropical plants. Then, in 1996, the hotel nearly doubled in size again. The Delta Atrium encompassed 4.5 acres and featured a quarter-mile-long indoor river with flatboats carrying guests past water jets choreographed to music. When the Delta was christened, water samples from more than 1,700 rivers around the world were poured into that indoor river. There were 120 sable palms, 1,500 camellias, 40-foot magnolias. It was an indoor jungle with a southern accent. And it had become one of the largest non-casino hotel facilities in the continental United States. All of this, the park, the Opry, the hotel, formed a single interlocking complex. The hotel fed the park fed the Opry fed WSM. Everything pointed toward everything else. Nashville's entire tourism industry, in the words of the city's Convention Bureau Chief Butch Spiridon, was on that campus. Before Opryland, the only reason to visit Nashville was the Grand Ole Opry. After Opryland, Nashville was a destination. Meanwhile, the park itself kept growing. In 1981, Opryland added a wilderness-themed area called Grizzly Country, built around a new river rafting ride called the Grizzly River Rampage. The ride was supposed to be promoted by a one-time television special featuring a house band called the Grizzly River Boys. But the band proved popular enough to stick around. They changed their name to the Tennessee River Boys, went through several lineup changes, and eventually became Diamond Rio, one of the biggest country acts of the 1990s, with more than 10 million records sold. They were far from the only act to emerge from Opryland's stages. Kim Keyes, who would later tour with Amy Grant and Billy Joel, headlined shows at the park before being discovered there by legendary producer David Foster. Marty Slayton moved to Nashville specifically to perform at Opryland and went on to sing with George Strait for 18 years. The park was a farm system for the country music industry, a place where talented 20-year-olds could perform 5 or 6 shows a day in the Nashville heat, learn stagecraft by sheer repetition, and emerge as professionals. The park's performers weren't lip-syncing to recorded tracks. They were singing live, playing live, dancing live, in outdoor amphitheaters and covered pavilions, for audiences that ranged from bluegrass purists to families killing time between roller coasters. It was boot camp for entertainers, and it produced them by the hundreds. The Grizzly River Rampage, incidentally, was realistic enough that it was used as the qualifying course for whitewater events ahead of the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta. A theme park ride serving as an Olympic proving ground. That's the kind of oddity that only Opryland could produce. In September 1983, the ownership of this entire empire changed hands in a single transaction. NLT's parent, American General Corporation, had been looking to sell WSM, Inc., the entity that controlled the Opry, the park, the hotel, and the radio station, and had approached companies like MCA, Marriott, and Anheuser-Busch. Several companies were interested in individual pieces, but none wanted the whole package. Then Edward Gaylord, a newspaper and broadcasting mogul from Oklahoma City, stepped in and bought everything for $250 million. It was later called one of the entertainment industry's great bargains. Gaylord renamed the complex and reorganized his business around it. The same year, he launched the Nashville Network, TNN, a cable channel devoted to country lifestyles and entertainment. In 1991, the company acquired a majority stake in Country Music Television, CMT. An Oklahoma publishing family now controlled the infrastructure of country music. Through the late 1980s, the park was pulling nearly 2.5 million visitors a year. New attractions arrived every few years: larger coasters, water rides, seasonal events. In 1989, an indoor roller coaster called Chaos opened, a psychedelic experience involving a spectacular light show and clever design. Its twin, a ride called Revolution at a Belgian park, is still operating and has been outfitted with virtual reality headsets. In 1993, the game show Family Feud taped several episodes at Opryland during host Ray Combs' final season. That same year, the park started offering special Christmas-themed engagements in December. And in 1995, the Hangman debuted, a massive inverted steel coaster built by the Dutch firm Vekoma that cost Gaylord $8.5 million. It stood 109 feet tall, had 5 inversions, and hit 50 miles per hour. Its opening ride was broadcast live on morning television. Throughout all of this, the park was managed by a man named E.W. Bud Wendell, who ran Gaylord Entertainment from 1991 to 1997 and had overseen the Opryland properties for years before that. Wendell understood what he had. The park wasn't just an asset on a balance sheet. It was the engine that powered Nashville's tourism economy and a cultural institution that had incubated hundreds of careers. Under Wendell, the park had never, not once in its entire existence, failed to turn a net profit. In 1996, Opryland celebrated its 25th anniversary, and it was the top tourist attraction in Nashville. The hotel's massive Delta atrium opened that same year. The Convention Bureau's Spiridon was effusive. Prior to the park, the only reason to come to Nashville was to go to the Grand Ole Opry. What the park began to do was create a destination attraction that we needed. Amusement park trade publications were glowing. The Nashville Banner reported that Opryland officials were delighted with the park's trajectory. Everything about the Opryland campus, the park, the hotel, the Opry, the showboat called the General Jackson that cruised the Cumberland, was expanding, profitable, and beloved. And then Bud Wendell retired. His successor was the company's chief financial officer, a man named Terry London. London was not a showman. He was not a Nashville lifer. He was a numbers man who had inherited a golden opportunity: a profitable theme park, a world-class hotel, the Grand Ole Opry, cable networks, radio stations, and a brand synonymous with American music. And he looked at all of it and saw a piece of acreage that could generate more revenue per square foot if it were a shopping mall. The rumor started circulating among park staff in the late summer of 1997. That's when Alan Hall, the vice president, called the idea ridiculous. But by Halloween, the ridiculous had become reality. On or around October 31st, 1997, Gaylord publicly confirmed what no one wanted to believe. Opryland USA would close permanently on December 31st, 1997, just 2 months away, and its 120 acres would become the site of a massive retail and entertainment complex called Opry Mills, built in partnership with the Mills Corporation. The deal called for Mills to invest more than $225 million. Gaylord would contribute the land and retain a 33% stake. The complex would have an IMAX theater, a bowling alley, an ice rink, and more than 1 million square feet of retail space. The reasons given seemed defensible on a spreadsheet. Attendance had dipped slightly in 1997, partly because the 25th anniversary in 1996 had inflated that year's numbers. The park sat on a narrow triangle of land, river on one side, highway on another, hotel on the third, with no room to expand. Building new roller coasters cost $10 to $20 million every few years. Nashville's cold winters meant the park sat empty from November through February. A mall would generate revenue year-round. But here's what the spreadsheet didn't capture. Opryland wasn't a ride park competing with Six Flags. It was a one-of-a-kind institution, the only major theme park in America organized around live music. Nobody drove across state lines for J.C. Penney's. 2.5 million people a year drove across state lines for what Opryland offered. The park employed 2,500 people every season, many of them local teenagers getting their first jobs, foreign exchange students on summer work programs, musicians building careers. It was the gravitational center of a tourism economy that had no other anchor. A parent told the Nashville Banner after the closure what the park had meant at a practical level. "We've been very happy with the children working at Opryland. It was a safe environment, and the people they worked with and for were always really good. I never worried about them walking to their cars. There was just something really special about Opryland. They were outside a lot. They were outside where they couldn't be constantly thinking about what they could spend their money on." For thousands of Nashville families, Opryland was a summer institution, the place you went after church, the place your kids got their first paycheck, the place where you could sit in the shade and listen to live music while your children wore themselves out on water rides. Season passes were common. Repeat visits were the norm, not the exception. None of this mattered because there was no analysis. Years later, Gaylord's own spokesman would confirm to the Tennessean what everyone suspected. The current management team has found no evidence that former decision-makers even had a business plan for Opryland USA theme park, let alone any strategic analysis that led to closing it. They just did it. Gaylord tried to soften the blow. Executives presented initial renderings of Opry Mills that showed rides in the parking lots, rides in the mall, an entertainment complex that would supposedly retain the spirit of a theme park. Spiridon saw massive architectural plans that seemed inspired by the Mall of America in Minnesota. I looked at massive renderings that showed rides in parking lots and rides in the mall, he recalled, but the idea was never fully baked. The promised theme park elements never materialized. What Nashville got was a conventional outlet mall. The city erupted. Within 2 weeks, a chorus of outraged residents called for Nashville to buy and save the park. Mayor Phil Bredesen's office issued a statement that read like an obituary. To preserve the park in its current form seems to be virtually impossible. When locals pleaded with Gaylord to donate the rides to the city, Hall, the same man who had called the whole idea ridiculous 10 weeks earlier, said no. Nothing would be saved. Within 3 weeks of the announcement, Gaylord had sold most of the park's major rides to Premier Parks, an Oklahoma City-based company that operated Six Flags properties, for roughly $7 million. The Hangman, the $8.5 million coaster that had been open for exactly 2 summers, was shipped to California and renamed Kong, where it still operates at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom. A few other rides were scattered to parks around the country. Most of the remaining coasters, including the Screamin' Delta Demon and Chaos, were trucked to a field at the site of Old Indiana Fun and Water Park in Thorntown, Indiana, where Premier Parks planned to build a new theme park. That park was never built. The rides sat in the weeds for years. Six Flags eventually sold the Indiana property in 2002, and most of the rides were scrapped for metal between 2003 and 2006. The hand-carved German carousel, the centerpiece of Opryland's children's area, was sold. The antique steam locomotives, Beatrice and Rachel, which had been beautifully restored and converted from coal to fuel oil, were separated from their tracks. The park's video archives were packed into storage. By July 1998, the Opryland site was cleared. Nashville's tourism industry went into free fall. It was, "What are we going to do? We're dead," Spiridon recalled. The city lost roughly 40% of its summer tourist business. Over the course of a full year, overall tourism was down 20%, softened only because convention business held steady. The Nashville Convention and Visitors Corporation scrambled to put together a campaign called Strength in Numbers, raising $1.5 million to reposition Nashville as a year-round destination rather than an Opryland destination. I remember talking to the downtown bars, and there weren't very many then, and I said, "We have to look at downtown as a museum by day and a theme park by night," Spiridon said. We had to use our history and legacy and tell Nashville's story differently to overcome the impact of the Opryland decision. It took 3 years to claw back to 1998 tourism numbers. Then September 11th happened, and it took another 3 years after that. Nashville eventually rebuilt its tourism industry, but it rebuilt it around something entirely different. Lower Broadway's honky-tonks, bachelorette parties, the city's booming food scene, professional sports. The Nashville that exists today as one of America's hottest destinations was forged in the vacuum that Opryland's closure created. Spiridon has acknowledged as much. Nashville is a stronger, better, bigger destination today. It forced us to become a city-wide destination instead of an Opryland destination. But stronger and better are not the same as what was lost. A scathing letter to the editor ran in the Nashville Banner in January 1998. Gaylord Entertainment Company has no desire to touch us citizens in a way that will have a positive, everlasting impression on our lives. It has one interest: money, profit. Another anonymous letter, published just days after the closure announcement, proved prescient. I urge the management of Gaylord to find an alternative way to increase its corporate profit without disturbing the operation of Opryland Theme Park. Failure is certain if you choose any other path. Failure arrived on schedule. Opry Mills opened on May 11th, 2000. The timing could hardly have been worse. The dot-com bubble had just burst. A mild recession was settling in, and American consumers were beginning to discover that they could buy things from their computers without driving to a mall. But the timing was the least of it. Terry London had also steered Gaylord into a bizarre side venture, buying up ChristianMusic.coms. The entertainment world was in the middle of an internet land grab, and London decided Gaylord should corner the market for Christian music online. He purchased web properties like lightsource.com and invested in digital platforms through a division called Gaylord Digital. The internet bubble's collapse gutted these investments. By the end of 2000, Terry London had resigned. Gaylord's board of directors mulled shutting down the entire company. The stock price cratered. The country music business, as Barron's put it, was flat as a raccoon in the middle of a highway. There was no vision, direction, or consistent leadership in that era of Gaylord, Spiridon said. They were going to be a hotel company, or they were going to be a tech company. They literally had no definitive direction. The numbers tell the rest. Gaylord's SEC filings reported costs of $40.2 million related to closing and dismantling Opryland USA. At the end of 2002, Gaylord sold its remaining 33% stake in Opry Mills to the Mills Corporation for $30.8 million, while also offloading more than $50 million in debt in the transaction. The company had spent more tearing down a profitable theme park than it received for its share of the mall that replaced it. Within 5 years of Opryland's closure, Gaylord was completely divested from the property. Mills Corporation itself soon fell apart. Between 2001 and 2004, the company reported significant accounting errors due to executive and professional misconduct. By 2007, Simon Property Group, a massive real estate investment trust, ended up with full ownership of Opry Mills. The 2008 financial crisis hit soon after, accelerating the forces that were already emptying malls across America. Between 2007 and 2009, 20% of the malls in the country closed. Then came the flood. On May 2, 2010, the Cumberland River overwhelmed Nashville. The Opryland campus, built everyone had always known in a flood zone, was inundated. 10 feet of standing water filled the Opry Mills Mall. The Opryland Hotel was devastated. Guests were evacuated as water surged through the massive atriums. The Grand Ole Opry House flooded. Even the Opryland video archives, packed away in storage since the park was demolished, were damaged. A rumor circulated that the Opry Mills Aquarium restaurant had flooded and sent sea life swimming through the mall's concourses. The rumor wasn't true, but the image it conjured, tropical fish gliding through an empty food court built on top of a dead theme park, was almost too perfect a metaphor to resist. The mall closed for nearly 2 years while Simon Property Group fought its insurers. When the case reached the Tennessee Court of Appeals, the court ruled that Simon could collect only $50 million on a $200 million policy, specifically because the mall had been constructed in a known flood zone. The hotel reopened in November 2010 after extensive renovations. The Opry House was restored. The circle of wood from the Ryman was still in its stage, but the mall that had replaced the park had proven to be exactly what its critics had predicted: a generic revenue box with no soul, no pull, and no defense against either water or time. In 2012, there was a brief, tantalizing possibility that the Opryland story might get a different ending. Gaylord Entertainment announced a new partnership with Dolly Parton's Dollywood Company to build a water and snow park on 114 acres across Briley Parkway from the hotel, a $50 million project expected to open by 2014. Dolly Parton, who had turned her own childhood poverty into a theme park empire in East Tennessee's Smoky Mountains, seemed like the ideal partner to bring family entertainment back to the Opryland campus. But the partnership lasted less than a year. When Gaylord sold its hotel management rights to Marriott International for $210 million and restructured itself as a real estate investment trust, Parton pulled out. Gaylord makes decisions that they feel are good for their company and their stockholders, she said. And I have to make decisions based on what is best for me and the Dollywood Company. The company that had killed a theme park without a business plan had now lost the one person with both the credibility and the business sense to build a new one. Gaylord became Ryman Hospitality Properties on January 1, 2013. The Grand Ole Opry and the Ryman Auditorium, which had itself been beautifully restored in the early 1990s and reopened as a concert hall, remained under the company's ownership. The hotel became a Marriott-managed property. The Opryland name survived on the resort, on the drive, on the address. But the park it had been named for was a parking lot and a Gap outlet. Bud Wendell, the CEO, who had handed over a profitable enterprise and watched it be demolished, never softened his assessment. "That's the dumbest thing I've ever seen," he told Nashville Public Radio in 2018. "And the people that were responsible for it, I would think today would look back on it and say, yeah, it was a dumb, dumb decision. But they felt they could get a greater return on that piece of acreage out there if it were a mall as opposed to a theme park, America's only musical theme park." Even the company's later leadership agreed. Colin Reed, the CEO who succeeded London and ultimately stabilized Gaylord, said in 2012 that closing Opryland had been a bad idea. The company's own filings, its own spokespeople, its own executives, everyone eventually admitted it was a mistake. But admitting a mistake and undoing one are different things. You can't unbuild a mall and rebuild a theme park. You can't retrieve coasters from a scrapyard in Indiana. You can't reassemble a 25-year accumulation of tradition, talent, memory, and habit. You can close a park in 66 days, but you cannot reopen it in a lifetime. The Opryland Hotel, now the Gaylord Opryland Resort and Convention Center, still stands with its 9 acres of glass atriums and its indoor river and its quarter-mile of flatboat rides. It is, by any measure, a remarkable building. But the resort was designed to support a theme park and an Opry House, and without the park, it sits in an odd context. A grand southern destination resort anchored on one side by the Opry House and on the other by a shopping mall that could be in any suburb in America. If you walk behind the hotel near the Cumberland River, there are traces, sections of old concrete pathway that lead nowhere, rusted remnants of the perimeter fence visible in the tree line near the cooling towers. The Grand Ole Opry House itself still stands, brick and plaza, at what used to be the park entrance. When you stand in front of it, you are standing on what was once the gateway to a world of music and roller coasters and live oak shade and corn dogs and bands that would someday sell millions of records, but right now were just kids in matching shirts playing their hearts out in the August heat. Today, a Nashville-born comedian named Nate Bargatze is trying to build what Opryland's destruction made necessary. Bargatze worked at Opryland as a teenager, his first job at 15 during the park's final years. The park closed during his senior year at Donaldson Christian Academy. He's now the highest-grossing comedian in the world, and in late 2025, he announced a partnership with Storyland Studios to develop a 100-plus acre theme park called Nateland, somewhere in the Nashville area, at an estimated cost of $350 million. They took Opryland from me, he told a Nashville television station, so I'm going to bring it back. The project's designers say the concept was inspired in part by Bargatze's childhood memories of Opryland USA. $350 million to build what $28 million built in 1972. And even if Nateland opens, renderings were released in mid-2026, a site has reportedly been chosen, it won't be Opryland. It can't be. The performers who got their start on those stages are in their 50s and 60s. The children who stuffed extra socks in their shoes to meet the height requirement for the hangman are raising children of their own. The German carousel is gone. Beatrice and Rachel are gone. The Wabash cannonball is gone. Chaos is scrap metal in a field that used to be a park in Indiana that was never built. The whole thing, the entire irreplaceable accumulation of a place that existed continuously for 26 years, was converted into debris in less time than it takes to plan a kitchen renovation. The Grand Ole Opry still broadcasts every Saturday night. The show has never missed a weekend. And inside the Opry House, in the center of the stage, that 6-foot circle of Ryman wood is still there, the piece of the old floor they carried forward when they built the new one, because the people who made that decision understood that some things, once destroyed, cannot be remade. The circle is worn smooth, the grain has darkened, and every week somebody stands inside it and plays. Opryland USA stood around that building for 25 years. Then, one man decided it would be more profitable as a mall. He didn't even run the numbers.